Hello, and welcome back to LendAPI Academy. My name is Kay, and this is episode 3 in our Introduction to LendAPI series. In this series, we are going to go through all of the features and functionalities offered in the LendAPI ecosystem, as well as teach you, a user, how to build and release a lending product utilizing our product. So with that being said, let's get started. In our last video, we left off setting up and finalizing our global settings menu, as well as the rest of our menu items in our settings bar. And today we're going to start our series on the workflow products. So if you remember, I talked about the workflow menu is really the nucleus of the LendAPI ecosystem. This is where one goes to actually build and release their product. You'll notice that the workflow is really divided into various different features and subsets. The first three, the Product Studio, Rule Studio, and Pricing Engine, are the connective tissue of LendAPI. These different features allow you to build your user experience, your decision logic, as well as your offers and pricing. Below that are variable studios and decision outcomes. These two are the fundamental pieces of LendAPI. These set you up to be able to easily build, drag and drop, and produce your product synchronously. And then, of course, the last four features and functionalities are set to allow the users to enhance their product, such as email templates, documents, and agreements to add more communication and a better overall user experience. So with that being said, let's start today on the Variable Studio. The Variable Studio is the fundamental building block of your workflow menus. This is really the starting point to create and pull together all of the different pieces. You need to set up a variable library before you can start to create your user experience or your decision engine. Every single connective tissue starts with the variable library. So to point to triggers, to set inputs, and to do everything in between, you need to make sure you have the correct variables set in place. Before you get started, it's okay to not have all of your variables set up. It's important to understand where and how to set up your variables, because one of the best things about LendAPI is we give you the accessibility and variability to change as you go. So if you have different variables that you need to input or variables that come up as you go, you can always set it up here. All right, with that being said, let's get started. When you navigate to Variable Studios, the first thing you'll see is a list of pre-existing variables. If you are new to LendAPI, you will see some of our out-of-the-box variables ready for you to use. These are connected to our templates that are available for users. Of course, if you want to set up your own variables, I highly encourage you to. This is a way to do it. These three buttons are set up for you to be able to navigate and add new variables into a library. To add new, all you have to do is select the variable type. We have three simple direct variables. These are offer table variables, which are what we call our output variables. These are to pull specific direct information from our offer table in the pricing engine, or to generate outputs such as prices, loan amounts, APRs, and everything in between to users. The form input variable is the input variable, very simply put. It is the intake variable for users and clients to be able to input what they need, such as first last name, date of birth, social security number, anything that you cannot be retrieved from a data source. The tenant variable is actually a configurable component type. This, if you are familiar with the development world, allows you to set specific components and configure these variables. So a tenant variable can be both an input or an output variable. More importantly, a tenant variable can also be assigned to an environment or a subgroup. Within the LendAPI ecosystem, we allow you to add multiple different lenders, and within each lending product, you can actually add subgroups, such as if you are an owner of a coffee shop, or if you are an owner of electronic shop and you provide embedded financing, and each of your shop has its own set of standards. Each of them can be a subtenant, and each of them can have their own variable and be configured. So that gives you a lot of flexibility here. And then finally, the last variable type is what we call our derived variable. Our derived variable is very unique to LendAPI. The derived variable is a actionable variable, meaning that you can utilize this and actually create mathematical expressions and formulas to be able to go in and retrieve different variable types and pieces as you go. So with that, let's get started. One last thing to note here is we do allow you to download all of your variable library into an Excel sheet for different testing, as well as a lookup. And with that, let's get started. So I'm going to start by adding some form input variables because I would like to actually create an intake application for our users. Like I said, the form input can be, simply put, anything that you want to ask your end clients to give to you. So we can start with something simple such as first name. And you'll note that the variable name here will appear as a header when you go in and actually drag and drop this into your product studio. So you want to make sure that the spelling and grammatical errors here are all set in place. Of course, you can always change this variable name at a later point. The variable code is going to be the unique code for which you want to call this variable. So when you call it and drag and drop into your decision logic or your pricing engine, you will utilize this as your unique variable code. So each of these will be unique and will not be editable once you set your variable. You want to make sure your variable code follows a certain pattern for each unique product so you can actually set it and be able to retrieve it easily. With that being said, I think we'll name this after our product, which is pizza lending. And then the variable type itself will be what kind of variable this will be generated as. Is it numeric, such as numbers, string, which includes numbers, characters, and special characters, as well as text, Boolean, which encompasses your yes and no questions, dates, which are your simple date formats, or list, which allows you to set up a list type. So for this, we are going to set up a string because we would like the users to type in their name. And then the display type allows you to display either as a regular, which doesn't have any specific types connected to it, money, which will display with a number with a $sign and commas in the right places, or percentages, which will be displayed in a percentile. Once you set your display type, this will be displayed once a user types in their input. And then, of course, if you're using numeric variable types here, this is where you set your decimal limits. So how many statistical decimals is it going to be statistically significant? You can set this based on your needs as well. Our default is 2. Of course, you can set it to however much you need. Of course, because we are using string, this right now does not have much cadence for our first and last name. with that, we've created our first successful variable. And once we are ready, we are able to utilize this variable in all the rest of these different formats and functionalities. Real quickly, you'll notice that we do list each variable in this table format. And one thing to note, we give you some of the details up here when it was created, and of course the type, which is custom for each new variable that you create. And then the status here will be generated as active or inactive. One of the greatest things about LendAPI is you have the capability, of course, to set or deactivate any variable if it is no longer needed. And of course, you can always reactivate it. So instead of deleting, we allow you to deactivate certain types of variables. This means that you will always have this in your variable library, but it will not be utilized. And then, of course, if you need to edit, you can always click this action button here. So let's create a few more form input variables. We created our first name. Let's create our last name in the same format. Of course, we want to utilize the same variable code structure, so it will be easy to search. And with that, we've added another variable into our form input variable type. Let's add a date, as we will be asking for date of birth. And we will be asking the variable type code will be in. And because this is going to be a date range, we want people to select this as a date range, we're going to put this variable type as date, and then we'll put this again as regular and add it in. Let's add in a field for income because we will need income for this variable. Let's try for monthly income because we are doing lending, so we would like for the users to put in their monthly income. Monthly income. One thing also to note here is you have to follow this structure when naming your variable code, all lower cases and with underscores. And of course, income is going to be a number and it will be in a money format. So we will want this to be displayed with a dollar amount and commas in the right place, and we'll limit to 2 decimal numbers for American dollars. So we also want to set up expenses because we do need to understand the amortization or calculate the debt to income ratio. So let's also do monthly expenses for our particular product. And of course, this is again going to be a number, and it will be a money type, and will be set as 2 decimal limits. And then let's add one last one where we will select for marital status, of course. So let's put this as a Boolean because we want to understand if a user is married or not. And this one we're going to set as a Boolean. And this should appear as a married yes or no question. And then we will add this into our variable library. Let's see. I think we'll need a few more for our application. So let's put in an address. Let's put in a few address fields. we'll start with the state. This will be for users to put in their address to make sure we can match them, to make sure that they live in the United States. For this state, one thing to note is the LendAPI AI functionality that's built into our system will recognize when you type in a state or when you type in certain sensitive information such as social security number, and we will make sure it's formatted correctly. So once we create this variable, when we drag it into the actual product studio, any variable that is named state will have the automatic drop down with all 50 states for the users to select it. So we will go ahead and add that. And I think we're good on adding some format input variables for now. Let's try for a derived variable. So when I said earlier that the derived variable is really utilized to create mathematical expressions and for you to leverage for your decision engine or pricing engine or even your product studio, it's really powerful for users to activate. So let's do this. Let's create a derived variable for our debt to income ratio. So I'm going to name this debt to income. And because the way I believe we mostly calculate our debt to income is based on monthly expenses over monthly income. It gives us a good set of information. So for this, it's going to be regular, and we'll set it as 2 decimal places because it will be a ratio. Again, we can always come back and change this at a later date. So for this, we want to actually create an expression to calculate the debt to income ratio so users don't have to do it for us. To do so, we need to make sure that we capture the monthly expenses and divide it by the monthly income. So when users type this information in, we can simply capture it and do the calculation for them. Now, because we already have these two numeric variables set, we're just going to create the expression and test it out ourselves. So let's do this. Let's set up our monthly expense and divide it by monthly income. And all we have to do is select the variable that we want to utilize in our expression. And by selecting it in our variable studio, in our variable library here, you can actually paste it into your expression. And let's divide that by income. And let's just make sure this is mathematically correct. Our expression check allows you to make sure you don't mix different types. So when we're doing checks, we want to make sure the numeric expressions are only being divided by other numeric expressions so that there is no error in the expression itself. You will also note if you want to learn all of the different variable expressions you can create with a derived variable, you can click here and we will give you all of the powerful tools that we do. It goes beyond simple binary arithmetics to having expressions themselves to if and booleans and everything in between. So feel free to play around and get really creative with our derived variable. So once we're ready, let's test it out. First we have to save it, and once we've saved it, let's test out our variable and see what we get. So traditionally our monthly expenses will want to be a lot lower than our monthly income. That gives us the best ratio and gives lenders the best idea of how well the user is going to pay back their loan. And I believe this is actually set to be a percentage. So I'm going to go ahead and set this as a percentage and multiply it by 100. So that is actually set as a percentage. And I'm going to change this display type to percentages. Now, we have not yet decided whether this will be an actual displayable variable or won't. We can do that, we can decide as we start to build the product itself. But with that, let's recheck our variables and see what we get. So let's put in our monthly expenses by our monthly income, and we get 40. I believe this is a standard variation for debt to income ratio, which means this was successful. Now, we've created our first derived variable. Let's create one offer table variable before we leave, because it's important to note, of course, you can create all your variables at once if you have your workflows thought through. For me, I still want to think a little bit more about what actual outputs we will be getting. But I understand we'll probably want to get a loan amount. This will be something that a user will actually be able to be offered, or I should say approved amount. And this will be something that we will program into our pricing engine in the next few videos. But it's important to set this up so that when we go and program this into our pricing engine, we have this variable already set in place. So I'm going to name this approved amount, and of course it's going to be numeric, and this will also be a money type. And this, because this is an output table, this will be directly pulled from whatever is in our decision engine. So the display type is really going to be dependent on what type of number you put in. With that, we're going to add in our offer table variable, and this is going to be set as system output. All right, we've added our first set of variables in our variable studio. I'm going to go through and add some more and come back and start to utilize them in our next set of features and functionalities. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, enjoy playing around with LendAPI.